Let's go!
Welcome to 𝗂𝗂𝗃. You know, a nice, friendly, safe community.
Good morning!
Here we are in Charlotte, another day in the life. One of my most favorite games of the year is Jackie Robinson Day.
Here we are back in Birmingham, Alabama.
And the 1-2 pitch, swing and a miss. And now that is the longest outing for Schultz this year.
Hey, welcome in to Road to the Rate. I'm Connor McKnight. This is a White Sox-focused, player development-focused podcast here on CHSN. It was the idea of the White Sox player development side of front office. And I'm your host. Happy to have you with us here on the show. If this is your first time stumbling across, thanks. Great to have you. We've got two other fantastic episodes with a couple of players in the White Sox system that you're going to want to hear from, and the White Sox Director of Player Development, Janish. Paul is our guest today on the show, and if you're listening to this a little bit later on, you know, at your leisure, the big news in the show, actually it broke just about 15 minutes before we recorded, is that Noah Schultz, the top prospect in the White Sox minor league system, and Braden Montgomery, guys who's rising through the ranks, have been named to the Futures game in Atlanta this year during the All-Star break. So we'll begin our conversation with Paul about those two. Grant Taylor has made his debut in the bigs. He's been up for a couple of weeks, and he's been lights out in the bullpen. Not so long ago, Grant Taylor was a minor leaguer, getting himself to the point where he's ready to make his big league debut. We'll talk to Paul about him as well. Also, we'll talk about what it takes to hit a major league fastball and how the White Sox, as an organization, are trying to identify and develop the traits that can come up to the big leagues and hit 97 and 98 on a regular basis with a little bit of authority as well. It's not easy. Just ask everybody else in baseball. We're all trying to find the same thing. That's all coming up. Don't go anywhere. Road to the Rate with Paul Janish continues right after this. All right, so our privilege to welcome back to Road to the Rate Paul Janish, the Director of Player Development for the Chicago White Sox. Paul, thanks for hopping on. Obviously a busy couple of days in player dev with the Futures game and everything. And you are, I would imagine, right in the middle of what we call the car wash, going through every single interview everywhere about Noah Schultz and Braden Montgomery making the Futures game. Congratulations to both of them and to the org. Thanks for hopping on. Lots to get to here, but let's start with Noah Schultz and Braden Montgomery. They are going to the Futures game in Atlanta. How cool is that?
Yeah, that's cool. For both of those guys, obviously Noah's round two, but he's excited about it again. Braden, first time to be able to go experience that, well deserved. But yeah, excited for those guys, like you mentioned, excited for the organization, but ultimately, like that's just an experience for those guys to enjoy. And I'm actually going to get the opportunity to go down there as well, and I'll be in Atlanta to get to check it out, with them. So I'm excited about that selfishly, but at the end of the day, this is about those guys and being able to do something cool based on what they've accomplished.
You and me both. I'll see you there at the Futures game. I think for Noah, though, it's kind of interesting because I get that, repeating an honor like this isn't quite getting to the big leagues, after making your first Futures game or what have you. But for a lot of us looking at Noah Schultz, he's a different guy now than he was that made the Futures game last year around. I wonder if that rings true to the organization or if all the changes are part of a plan here and this is just like Noah evolving as opposed to being two completely different kinds of guys.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's just him developing, like any other 21-year-old does, right? Like he's figuring out who he is and maybe more importantly who he wants to be, and it's been fun to watch. I've come to get to know Noah a little bit, get to be around him. He's not going to be the most talkative guy all the time, but he's you watch him interact with his teammates. You watch him, from a competitive standpoint, start to understand, what he needs to do and accomplish what he wants to accomplish. And he, it's just been fun. But yeah, that's exactly what I would highlight as well. And even though it's round two, I know he's excited about doing it again. And it's talking about it being comparing it to getting called up to the big leagues. Like it ain't that, right? So he's checking this box, and hopefully at some point down the road he's going to check that box too.
I wonder this, though, and I think credit to the White Sox front office in this regard. You guys don't beat around the bush about some of the struggles that any player may have here or there. Noah's, gotten hit around a little bit in 2 AAA starts. As you and I are talking here, I would imagine that some of that's expected. I would imagine some of it's, just part of being a pitcher. You're going to get hit every now and again. What do you make of 2 starts for Noah at AAA? What do you make of, what was the thought process going into that promotion for you? Because we had seen, Sox fans had seen guys like Drew Thorpe and 𝗵𝗻 𝗍𝗏 make the move from AA to the majors last year. And many figured, myself included, I'll raise the hand and be wrong in this, that maybe it'd be AA to major leagues for Noah too.
Yeah, they're all different, right? It's not a linear deal, and the decision to bring Noah to Charlotte, there's a couple of things, right? Like he had a really good year in the second half of last year in Birmingham. Had a good start to this year. Was able to make some adjustments early this year that were encouraging, relative to dealing with right-handed hitters specifically, and some of his usages. And at the end of the day, like it's AAA is harder. Right? I mean, there's better, more experienced hitters. So for him specifically, we thought that this was going to be a good next test of being able to adjust and being able to execute. And Charlotte's obviously an offensive park, but look, it's still not going to be as difficult what he's going to face in the big leagues. And so we felt good about where Noah is and who Noah is, to say, look, if this is the next step in his development, and to your point about having 2 starts that he would tell you could have gone better, that doesn't concern me or us. I do think I feel comfortable telling you, like, I'm a proponent, and I think it's really beneficial for guys to experience a little bit of adversity and struggle a little bit at the minor league level, because we all know it's going to happen at the major league level. And to be frank, Noah hasn't dealt with a ton of struggles throughout his minor league career, and so not worried about it. I do think it's beneficial. I think he's ready to endure whatever kind of semblance of struggle that he may get, and he's going to bounce back.
Now that we've got pitch level data on Noah, we the public, not the White Sox, obviously, you guys have had the numbers on him his entire career, but now that we have pitch level data at AAA, we can kind of see what he's using, what he's not using. Where is he at in terms of messing around with his repertoire and his arsenal? What are the asks of Noah Schultz as it comes to, like, these are the pitches we want you to work on, even if you don't want to throw this in a 2-2 count? Are we at that situation for him still at AAA, or is it a little bit different? Yeah,
I think it's a little bit of both, right? Like, I think it is toying with some of the repertoire stuff, seeing what he's more comfortable with, what he can execute with. The stuff's not going to be the problem. It's going to be the command over the course of time, especially at the major league level for him or any other pitcher for that matter. It's a little bit of all of those things included. But yeah, at the end of the day, like, helping him understand from a game planning standpoint, look, when he goes to the big leagues, we think he's going to have success against left-handed hitters, right? I think that's safe to assume. He's going to need to get good at getting right-handers out consistently and knowing, against certain types of hitters, what he needs to do to have success. And so we're kind of in that window of trying to help him understand what that is and him continuing to execute.
Hagen Smith is back in the mix for the Birmingham Barons. He spent about a month between competitive starts. That's my term, but I think you'll probably correct that as we go here. How did it go for Hagen before he went to this kind of reset, and how has it looked since? All that kind of. What was the goal of? How did you find the benchmarks for Hagen in his time away from the Birmingham Barons, away from wearing a jersey and making competitive starts against another AA team? Yeah, so ultimately, what the situation was handled pretty cautiously for obvious reasons, right? Like, in a vacuum, Hagen could have been probably back on the mound a little bit sooner, but we felt really strongly about making some adjustments, mechanically that weren't severe by any means. It was just, the kind of thing that he maybe had gotten away from, for lack of a better way to say it, maybe on accident a little bit. And, the thing that stuck out to me about the time that he was off, so to speak, was how irritated he was about being off. All that kid wants to do is pitch, which is, it's the kind of guy that you want. And, excited that he got in the game yesterday. He obviously threw very well, or Saturday rather, and threw very well, and was operating freely, and recovery and all that stuff seems to be right where it needs to be. And it's the kind of thing that was just a really small speed bump in the road that we probably like I said, erred on the side of caution. But Hagen's in a good spot, and excited to see him the second half of the season, honestly. I think it's really interesting, because we want to focus so much on player dev here in the podcast on Road to the Rate, that you've got this, I don't know, third option of development, both with Colson Montgomery here now and Hagen Smith. And not that they're exactly the same, but we're going to look at it from the outside in as something that's like a third option. You want pitchers to get a certain amount of innings or pitches or, just kind of workload on the arm. We are not going to be able to measure what Hagen did in his time away. We're only going to be able to see the innings that he's thrown for Birmingham or wherever else he might throw this year. How do you feel? How many innings does he have left? How much work did he get done in this kind of off-site assignment? And how are you guys kind of figuring out how that looks different and wears on him and kind of also builds him up at the same time in terms of, being ready for 26 whenever that's, going to come around?
Yeah, it's a good question. From a workload standpoint, he's fine. He's, big, strong kid. We obviously will monitor that as the season goes, but with this little, kind of reset, so to speak, he's going to be in a good spot. He'll get built back up and operate pretty normally, probably for the rest of the year. One of the things that I would, in terms of part of the, time off or whatever was, we have to remember this is Hagen's first full season, right? Adjusting to the schedule of, pitching every 5 days is one thing. One of the things is, in addition to that, is the routine. So anybody who's been around Hagen knows that, like from the third throw, he'll tell you he's ready to go, right? Like he's likes to throw hard, likes to work hard. So we, part of this was helping him understand from a routine standpoint, being able to, make sure that we're appropriately ready every single day, whether you're talking about playing catch, whether you're talking about a side session, whether you're talking about getting ready to pitch in the game, right? Which are all different things. But so it's continuing to understand him and helping him understand himself and what he needs to do to get ready on a daily basis, whether that's a game day or whether it's a work day.
I want to go to the Major League bullpen here just briefly. It won't take long to talk about how great Grant Taylor's looked for the White Sox in the pen. He was just recently promoted. As you and I are talking, it's been about 2.5 weeks since Grant Taylor was promoted to the bigs. As you and I are talking, they just finished the series against the San Francisco Giants. He had a 2-inning save in a 1-0 ball game and struck out Rafael Devers on a curveball that could only be described as absolutely filthy and disgusting and not safe for work. What popped off the radar to you guys about Taylor when he showed up in spring training that wasn't just the stuff? What is it about him that made you guys go, oh yeah, this is a thing?
Yeah, I think that, like to your point, the stuff sticks out, right? It's unique, especially in a shorter stint role like we're seeing him in Chicago currently, right? The thing that sticks out to me, and this is what I shared with Chris when we were discussing, what made sense in terms of timing, et cetera, is just the makeup of the kid, the competitor, the want to be really, really good. Like he doesn't want to get to the big leagues. That's not what he wants. He wants to, be an all-star. He wants to dominate the major league level, which, time will tell, but assuming health, he's off to a good start. And that's what I would tell you. I would tell you that, Grant has a unique understanding of where he wants to go and what he wants to do. He's been around. It's been documented. He's buddied with Paul Skeens, and he's got other buddies that he played with in college and against in college that are currently at the major league level. And that's what he wants to do. He's not scared of it. He's not timid. He wants to be in those situations, and that doesn't mean he's going to have success from here on out all the time. I mean, we all know that the major league is hard, but at this point, that was one of those factors. You just bet on the kid.
Last year, the White Sox had a very unique situation come around, and it was Garrett Crochet, kind of raising his hand and saying, I want to be a starter again, right? Or I suppose again for the first time since his time at Tennessee, right? It was definitely a catalyst, right? From what I understand, Garrett being willing to do this was definitely a catalyst, though there were other people in the front office, Chris Getz included, who had this idea. For Taylor to get back into the rotation at some point, right? We're not going to put a timeline on it because that would be ludicrous. Is he going to have to say, hey, let's go do this? Is that already baked in because you guys know who Grant Taylor is? What is the catalyst to restart that journey for him in the bigs whenever that comes around as we sit here now?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both, right? Like at the end of the day, it's going to be up to, Chris, the front office and the pitching group to determine, what's best for Grant. As we sit here today, part of that evaluation is health, right? Like he's still he's still, relatively speaking, going to have a workload this year, and that was part of the decision to put him in the pen and in the short term. But long term, I wouldn't put anything past Grant in terms of being able to accomplish it, in terms of taking a challenge head on, those kinds of things. But there's enough examples now where guys have done both. You mentioned Garrett, obviously, is our personal example that we're all familiar with, but there's been plenty of guys that have gone from the reliever role back to the starting rotation and had some success. And so I think they're individual. I think you got to be careful, putting a blanket statement on it or a timeline, to your point, that's probably just not prudent. But I do feel comfortable saying, like, Grant's gonna take whatever the organization wants, and he's gonna do it to the best of his ability. And at some point, if that's starting, then he'll take that challenge on, and I believe he would give himself the best chance to have success.
I want to stay at the big league level in a way here, and it's something that we on the broadcast, whether it's John or Steve or Brooke or myself, have been kind of talking about and analyzing here is knock the mic off the thing. Analyzing here over the little bit is the ability to hit the fastball, cover heat and velocity. How much, in what ways does player dev as a department focus on that as you bring players into the organization? What kind of talk goes around finding bats that can cover velocity? How do we find those? What do those look like? Where do they come from?
Yeah, I think it's the kind of thing that you can track a little bit, relative to the draft or player acquisition. And, if you got a kid that's playing in the SEC, he's going to face some good arms, right? Like, those are going to be some of the top picks in the draft on the pitching side. So there's some context there, but I do think when you start talking about it, like, it is still in the minor leagues at the lower levels. Like, I joke about it, but like, to get yourself out of A ball, you got to be able to hit the fastball. To get yourself out of Double A, you got to be able to hit the fastball. Like, it's just the nature of it. Not that the guys aren't throwing off speed stuff, but it's kind of a progressive as you go down the organization. Off speed stuff is less and less landed for a strike, so you have to respect it less, right? So you have the ability to kind of hunt the fastball, but. And not all fastballs are created equal, and this with the amount of information that we have, whether you're talking about a guy that's got, a four-seam fastball that's got a lot of ride that he's at the top of the zone versus a sinker cutter, like, there's various things, and it's constantly changing, right? Like, there's pitch repertoires or pitches are being added to guys' repertoires all the time. And at the end of the day, I think there's two factors. There's Ryan Fuller would tell you, like, being on time, and then from a game planning standpoint, understanding what the pitcher's trying to do to you, and defending it appropriately, right? And that's going to be a daily thing. It's because, like I said, if it's left-handed pitcher, right-handed pitcher, ride guy, sinker guy, cutter guy, there's different things to combat. And I think part of that, equation is understanding what those different things are on a given day.
What's so funny is you mentioned those two things, and I figured you'd be heading that way. You didn't mention bat speed, or at least it's not, specific to this. And we can do this now as baseball fans. We plug into Baseball Savant, which is a beautiful tool for us to try and get close to how you guys measure some of the players. But bat speed's great, but it doesn't mean that you can necessarily cover that fastball. So how do you, as a player dev guy and the rest of it, mold that or kind of blend that bat speed of a player into the approach and understanding what a guy's trying to do to you, like you mentioned?
Yeah, look, I mean, you start talking about bat speed, we'd rather have it than not have it, right? Like
no doubt, right?
The guys that have the most success as a general rule, they have better bat speed than the other guys. But if you're talking about order of operations, making good decisions, meaning swinging at strikes and taking balls, has been talked about a lot, and we will continue to harp on that. I think that's number one, and then. Just the ability to touch it, right? Like, making contact is going to be prioritized as well. And then, but yeah, we'd love to have more bat speed than not. And I think that there's some training tools that we have too, like being able to replicate, with a machine, what balls are doing, and being able to practice, difficult pitches, right? Difficult situations. And at the major league level, they have the trajectory, right? And they, you can replicate almost any pitcher that they're going to face. So there's some of those kinds of things too that you can combat it from a training standpoint and getting guys comfortable with, training hard.
I got into a fairly in the weeds conversation with some scouts not too long ago, just kind of about the idea of hit tool, right? And for those of you who are kind of watching the podcast and getting into the scouting lingo, I think probably better for me to ask Paul to kind of decide what hit tool is rather than me telling you. So we'll do that in a sec. But whether this hit tool thing is a projectable skill set, whether it's something that we can see at the college level or amateur level and decide, yes, that's hit tool, as Paul will describe for you briefly, and whether or not we can see that play through a guy's career. Where are we at in the industry now in terms of rating and then developing that hit tool in a player?
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question, but what I would say is,
for me, Paul, I would never. Are you kidding?
Right. I would highlight, the ability to hit is different than swinging, right? Like, so I do think we, as an industry, it can be dangerous, being so enamored with the swing and having a perfect swing, which is great. But if you swing at a crappy pitch, it doesn't matter, right? And so, like, I'm just going to use one of our examples of like a 𝗪cie 𝗰𝗶𝗹. Not to say that Chase doesn't have a good swing. That's not what I mean. But like, that kid can hit, right? And part of that is because he, again, like we highlighted, he takes the balls and he swings at the strikes in a lot of cases, and he's got a really high competitive will. And I think that's another piece of hitting that, if we're talking about hitting and we're not talking about swinging, competitive will is a real thing. Like the want to beat the guy on the mound is something, again, that we continue to embrace. And, a lot of the people listening to this are watching the major league games, but I can promise you, like, the grind of the minor leagues is a whole different animal. And the guys that have the opportunity to get to the big league level, it's hard to explain what they've already accomplished just to get there. And that's before they had success or not success at the major league level. But the hit tool is something that we're all chasing. If you listen to people in the industry, they'll tell you pitching's ahead of the hitting. And as a general rule, I think that's probably right. But, we're, as an industry, I think, continuing to chase how we catch up and how we game plan. And again, like I said, I think a lot of it has to do with understanding what the pitchers are trying to do and on a given day, and understanding too that, like, hitting against a certain type of pitcher is going to require maybe something different than what the guy yesterday did. So it's tough, but I go back to it. I think we can't lose sight of the competitive will of an individual, in the box, in a game, in the seventh inning with a man on second base to tie the game, right? Like that's different than, making sure our swing is perfect early in the day.
It's a really interesting way of delineating the two, because we hear all the time pitching is different than throwing, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't it be that hitting is different than swinging? And how haven't we kind of developed that, dichotomy there too? I like that a lot. Is that kind of a newer approach here a little bit, or is that, kind of an old saw that I've missed because I didn't play minor league ball?
Yeah, no, I think it's maybe a little bit of both, but it's definitely something that we believe in and that I believe in. And again, that's not to take anything away from training good swings at all, right? It has to do with assuming accountability within a game of being able to execute in a game. And I think that it's subtle, but can be kind of profound,
It hit me, that's for sure. When we are getting closer rather to the Major League Draft, and I think folks who are watching this for the player dev conversation of it all would be interested in knowing, what is your role and the role of player development, the folks under you, when it comes to the Major League Baseball draft? How does Mike Shirley and his team get you guys involved? When does that happen? What do those processes look like? And obviously, it's a newer front office. Shirley has been in his role longer than you've been in yours. But now that you've got a swing at things, in what ways are you guys trying to work together to make pick number 10 and every other pick a guy that's going to impact the big league level?
Yeah, and I think I'm getting ready to go to Chicago next week to be there for, the week leading up to the draft. And there's a lot of conversations that will take place there and that kind of stuff. But the answer, it really started, as soon as last year's draft was over. Like, I talk to Schultz a lot. We see each other, throughout the season. We talk about the current players that we have. And I think that's big. I think the connection between, scouting, player acquisition and player development is important, right? Like, we talk about what we feel like we can improve and what we can make better, and what we probably are going to need to, in terms of risk reward, maybe stay away from, because that's a really tough thing to improve upon over the course of time. But yeah, for me, it's being in the room. I love talking to the scouts. You talk about guys that are grinding and just the fabric of the industry in terms of seeing and gathering information and that kind of thing. in accordance with, our, the R&D department and having really good data to assess those players as well. It's just a combined kind of a unified front. And I think Chris has done a really good job, really kind of mapping that out for like what he wants and what he envisions and giving everybody clarity on trying to accomplish that vision.
Paul, before we wrap it up, like we always try to do here with you on the podcast, I want to give some shine to two players in the system that might not be getting the pub. I mean, we do Road to the Rate every game. I point out some players in the farm system, but often it's, hey, Hagen Smith is making another start, or Noah Schultz made it to AAA, or look, Colson Montgomery had a 2-homer game, and White Sox fans know those names as they should. But can you give us two guys in the system that are putting up some good numbers or some good appearances or just getting done what coaches are asking them to get done based on who they are in the moment?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a loaded answer with 𝗵𝗂 because he was called up to the major leagues. Okay, I had the good fortune of being in Birmingham when that happened. And, to see the response from his teammates and also from the staff, I mean, tears were shed. And and look, he was pitcher of the month in the Southern League and all the stuff. He's obviously performed very well. And so that's one person I would say is it's a really good thing to point to because, again, you talk about opportunity. You talk about, that resonating throughout the organization of guys seeing that it can happen. That was significant for me. And also it was, and this is in an effort to give Jake all the credit in the world from a perseverance standpoint. And it was just one of those things that makes you feel like you're doing things the right way because of the way that everybody responded to it. On the offensive side, I'd be remiss if I probably didn't bring up like a Sam Antonacci. I know he's starting to get a little traction, but we talk about identity and you talk about, performance really. Like this is not he plays hard kind of pick. It's a, hey dude, this is a good baseball player that is going to give himself every opportunity to advance up and play in the big leagues at some point. But he plays the game really hard. He does, from an offensive standpoint, what we like and controlling the strike zone and having really good at-bats over and over again. And so those are the two that I would highlight.
I've been on Sam for a little while now. Not to say that Jake hadn't pitched and deserved it and everything like that, but I've been on Sam for a little while now, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if we're buzzing his phone for a Road to the Rate appearance here in a couple of weeks. He's a fun player to watch and a guy that I think fits on some big league rosters here in not too long.
Yeah. You're going to have to get your questions ready because he's not going to do the talking unless you ask him.
That's what we do here. We do the hard stuff. We dig. That's what we do on Road to the Rate. Paul, thanks again. As always, congratulations on the futures picks for Noah Schultz and Braden Montgomery. Look forward to seeing you and those two in Atlanta for the futures game here not too long.
Thank you, Connor. Appreciate it, man.
Again, thanks so much to Paul Janish, White Sox Director of Player Development, for hopping on the show. Tune in again 2 weeks from now. It'll be right around All-Star time, where we'll have our next episode. We'll pick two players from the White Sox system to talk to you about how they're doing work to get to the bigs as quickly as they can. I'm Connor McKnight. Thanks again. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks here on Road to the Rate.